So we find ourselves in this situation where so many churches during the pandemic became expert at how to do virtual services. I did a lot of videos on it on this channel. I know a lot of people were giving resources and aid to help you figure out how do we do this? How do we do church virtually? How do we do it through live streaming and other ways? And then most churches open back up and are opening back up depending on where you are and how flexible the standards are. But now a lot of churches have settled back into doing what we did before, which is have a live service that's built for the people that are sitting there, knowing that there's a camera and people are watching online. That's how a lot of churches used to do it, unless they were intentional, right? But a lot of churches all of a sudden were forced to be more intentional and have kind of gone back to the way they were before. In this episode 25 of the Preaching Donkey podcast, I want to suggest one simple thing that if you keep doing this one thing, it will make your services moving forward that much more engaging to the people who are watching online, because you probably have way more people watching online now than you did before. It will keep them way more engaged, keep them way more connected, and give your church that much more of an impact in the community and whoever's watching, right? Not just the people that are sitting in the room. For that, stick around. My name's Lane. Like I said, this is episode 25 of the Preaching Donkey podcast. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching here on YouTube, give this video a like. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you're listening over on Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever else, I'm so glad to have you listening. Leave a review, especially at Apple Podcast, 5-star review, make a comment. Really, really helps for more people to hear this and for this podcast to reach more pastors, right? So excellent to have you joining me today. I want to put something free in your hands as we're getting started. Go to preachingdonkey.com/21 days. You can pick up my 21-day guide to creating killer sermons. It's a 3-week, 3-step process that will help you with setting up how do you prepare a sermon, how do you deliver a sermon in a way that's effective. It'll just give you some things to think about and some steps to take. Whether you've been preaching for a long time or you're brand new to it, I guarantee you there's something in this guide for you. It's a simple PDF, and I want to put it in your hands for free. preachingdonkey.com/21 days. All right, so what is the one thing that you can do? What is the one thing that you can do when you preach, knowing that there's cameras, or at least a camera that's on you, and on the other side of that camera are people sitting in their homes, maybe watching on Facebook Live, maybe on YouTube Live, maybe on your church online platform if you have one of those. All these things that you learned during the pandemic and had to figure out how to do all of a sudden, and you've kept those things going, which I hope you have for the people who aren't comfortable coming in person yet or can't. It's a really, really good thing for them to be able to still participate in what you're doing. And as I said, before we get to that one thing, as I said, a lot of churches are back to normal, which means that basically when you preach, you're just addressing the people in the room. You're just looking at the people in the room. You're just talking to them, and you're not talking to the people watching on the other side. Here is the one thing you can do. Look at the camera. I don't mean look at it constantly. I don't mean look at it all the time. I mean look at it often. When you preach to the people in your room, you are trying to make eye contact with the people, right? You might focus on this person for a second, then you move over to this section, and then move over to that section, and then maybe you move back to this section, and that's how all of us do it. All I'm saying is add the camera to that round of eye contact. So you're looking at the camera, and you're talking to it, and you're addressing it, knowing that people are on the side. And let me give you a little hint here. If you're one of those churches that has screens in the room, like if you have a big enough auditorium where screens are in the room and you are projected on the screen. In other words, there's a camera on you and it's also on the screen. I guarantee you there's more people looking at those screens than looking at you, right? Because it's just easier. You're on the screen, you're preaching, and people's eyes go to where it's just easier to see. You're bigger on the screen. It's easier to see what you're doing on the screen. And so at my church, we have those screens. I look out, people are looking at the wall because that's where the screens are, right? And so here's the thing. Not only Are you able to look at the camera and make eye contact with the people who are watching on Facebook Live or YouTube Live? But when you look at the camera, you're making eye contact with those people who are in the room. If that's the case, right? If you have those screens in your auditorium. But even if you don't, there's one major thing you need to do, and that's look at the camera. Now, what do you say when you look at the camera? At the beginning of your sermon, when you're saying hi to everybody, right? Hey, everybody, it's so great to have you here today. We're going to be in, such and such sermon and such series. Turn to such and such scripture. Include the people who are watching online, right? So when you greet everybody, hey, it's great to see everybody. And those of you watching online, those of you at Facebook Live, those of you on Church Online, it's so good to have you joining us today. Treat it like it's a campus of your church. Treat it like there just happens to be these people that are in the room with you and the people who are watching online. And if you're multi-site, you do this anyway. If you're multi-site video teaching, you do this anyway, but just make sure you always address the people that are watching online. And a couple of things that you can do to make it seem less like they're just spectating, they're just watching, and more like they're part of it. Use words like joining, right? Like, thank you for joining us today instead of watching, right? Watching is passive. This is how people watch, right? They're watching. It's like watching a football game. Oh, that was interesting. That was nice, right? Or a golf game, a little golf clap, right? But, and if you're listening, I'm leaning back. But when people join in, they're part of it, right? I'm leaning forward. I'm watching what's happening as someone who is participating in it. So things like, if you're joining us online, it's so great to have you with us today, right? They're not watching a show. They're joining you, but they're just doing it virtually. So if you look at the camera and you say, for those of you, I keep saying watching, for those of you joining us on Facebook, it's so awesome to have you with us today. If you just say that while you're looking at the camera when you begin the message, that goes 1,000 miles towards signaling to those people that they're a part of something. They're not just watching they might as well be watching a TV show. No, they're joining you today and they're with you, but just virtually. And then during your message, like I said, when you're making your rounds, you're looking at this section of people, you're looking at this section of people, you're noticing this section, add the camera to it. And maybe along the way, when you're giving examples or illustrations or you're asking questions, you might say, those of you joining us on Facebook, what do you think about such and such? Type it in the comments. Ask for that engagement. If you do those things, look at the camera. That's number one, eye contact. Let them know that you see them, that you consider them to be part of what's happening, and engage them in what's happening. That one thing, which I know that's three things, but it's really one idea, and that is to invite them into what you're doing. That will go a mile towards keeping them engaged until either one day they're able to join you again in your services and everything is kind of back to normal, or you continue to grow that audience of people who are watching and joining you on Facebook. And by the way, I think both should happen. Some people will eventually come and more people will start to watch on Facebook. And this just needs to be a part of what we're doing as we move into the future. So I hope that helps. Watch the camera, look at the camera, engage the people, and use words like joining us and with us and not just watching. If you did that, they're going to feel engaged, and that's going to help them be more a part of what you're doing and more on mission with your church. So let me know in the comments what you think. What do you do at your church? How do you engage people in this process when you preach? How do you bring in those people who are watching online? If you're watching here on YouTube, leave me a comment below. Let me know. This is episode 25. Thank you so much for joining me today. It really means a lot that you tune in and hang out with me for a little bit here on Thursdays. Can't wait to see you next week. Until then, remember, if God can speak through a donkey, he can speak through you and he can speak through me. We'll see you next time here at the Preaching Donkey Podcast.